You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. It's June 26th, 2020, and a group of protesters stands in the midst of the Capitol Hill Occupied protest. They're talking to another group of people, including city employees, about city sanitation workers getting access to the area. Towards the front of the group stands a 16-year-old boy wearing a gray baseball cap, a hoodie, and a surgical mask. He taps a protest organizer's shoulder so that they know that he wants to speak.
I would like to make it known that I wish that the police would have more supervision when it comes to their training and make sure that they're actually following their training, because when they're on these streets, they disregard all of it.
What you're hearing is some of the last known footage of Antonio Mays Jr. before he was shot and killed just days later in the CHOP zone. That death contributed to the end of the Occupied protest in 2020. The video was live-streamed by Omari Salisbury of Converge Media and remained on YouTube all of these years. The fact that it shows Antonio was only recently rediscovered shortly before a civil trial that could shed more light on Antonio's death. That civil trial, stemming from a lawsuit that the teen's father filed against the city of Seattle, is set to begin this week. Converge Media founder Omari Salisbury is here with me now, along with KUOW reporter and producer Will James. Omari and Will, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks.
So, Will, I just want to start quickly with you because you reported on this video being uncovered along with colleagues at the Seattle Times, Sydney Brownstone and David Gutman. Can you first just describe what is going on in this video? Why are we only seeing it for the first time now?
Yeah. So earlier this year, with the 5-year anniversary of CHOP coming up, a team from KUOW, the Seattle Times, NPR, and Omari started to look back on these events to try to investigate the killing of Antonio Mays Jr., which is this one of the unresolved threads from that summer. So Omari was kind enough to hand us over all of his footage. And we started to just go through it hundreds of hours on YouTube and on Omari's hard drive. And one of our colleagues at NPR noticed Antonio for the first time in this footage. Nobody had any idea that Omari had captured him 5 years ago.
Omari, you filmed it, but you didn't know that it was Antonio at the time, right?
No, I had no idea. And, you know, he was kind of newish on the scene as well.
Yeah.
And so when we were shooting it, I was kind of just doing what we do, which is these street corner press conferences, so to speak, and was just covering it.
Yeah. Sorry, Will, go ahead.
So we discover it, and it's just this moment of kind of shock, and we have to absorb it because for years now, we've been hearing about Antonio Mays Jr. He was shot in the course of a really chaotic night at CHOP. He and another teenager were driving around in this stolen Jeep. There were gunshots flying that night, and rumors have just persisted for 5 years. And Antonio Mays Jr. himself has been a little bit of a mystery. Like, everyone has been wondering, like, what was this teenager doing here? Why was he here? Who was he? And some of the people who are more apologetic of the people who shot Antonio Mays Jr. have been kind of putting forward this narrative that, like, oh, this kid, what if he was a criminal? Maybe he was a mass shooter. Maybe he was attacking CHOP. Maybe he was doing something, maybe he was doing something malicious that night. The details of that night aside, this new video gives us a glimpse of Antonio's character for the first time in a way that we haven't seen before because he's speaking in his own words. And so this was something for the whole team to have to kind of absorb and process and incorporate into our view of this 16-year-old kid.
And I want to get to more of the implications of what Antonio is doing in the video and what it means that that's been uncovered. But just to catch people up, if they don't remember, this is a 16-year-old kid who was killed during the protest. What happened the night that Antonio was killed? What do we know, the facts that are knowable right now?
Sure. In brief, just to set this up, 3 days after this video was shot of Antonio speaking, on the night of June 29th, 2020, this is deep into CHOP, about 3 weeks into the existence of CHOP, a white Jeep starts driving around the zone, and people start opening fire on this Jeep, believing apparently that they're under attack or under threat in some way.
People that are part of the CHOP organized protest?
Yeah. In social media posts and in interviews afterward, people kind of said it was CHOP's volunteer security team who was shooting. And it turned out that once the gunfire had stopped and the smoke had cleared, there was a 16-year-old boy lying dead in that Jeep and a 14-year-old boy wounded who survived. And the 16-year-old boy who died was Antonio Mays Jr.
Omari, this is footage, again, that you filmed. It's one moment of just hundreds. How much do you think you filmed at CHOP? How many hours do you think you filmed at CHOP total?
Well, I mean, we filmed continuously from May 29th to July 1st when the CHOP was cleared. So
hundreds, maybe thousands?
I was definitely in the hundreds for sure.
What did it feel like when you first saw this footage that had been uncovered of Antonio speaking?
For me, what it felt like, I mean, it was definitely a lot of surprise and it was a lot of shock. But what it felt like to me was seeing and hearing Antonio in his own words. It felt like an opportunity to put some dignity and some respect on this young man's name. You know, let's be clear. The city of Seattle, as well as other people, have drugged this young man through the dirt. They said that he was a thug. They said that, you know, he came up here to be criminal. They said everything else. And his father had an unenviable position of having to defend his son. And so to hear Antonio Mays Jr. literally speak from the grave, to set the record straight of what he was doing, what he was all about. And Will can speak more that, like, even the city's case is changed over these years. The details have changed. But one thing for sure is Antonio Mays Sr. has always said who his son was. And so sitting here right down the hall in this KUOW studios to see that tape for the first time, you know, it's important that even in depth and especially in depth, that at all possible, we get it right. And, you know, I don't know the outcomes of this trial or what's going to happen there, but I do know that for me, it was a real emotional experience to be able to say, well, this is who his father said he was, and to hear and see him in his own words. Man, it was powerful.
What did you see on the tape?
I saw what a lot of people were. If I could have a second here.
Yeah.
See, what people don't understand, first of all, is that the Seattle protests, man, this is 5 years of revisionist history. And it's 5 years of revisionist history because some of the biggest media outlets, this one, other ones, and even ourselves, for us, we're exhausted. But we've allowed people to rewrite history. We've allowed people to say that the East Precinct was under attack and the SPD, you know what I'm saying, had to run away. Man, the SPD abandoned their precinct. The SPD abandoned Capitol Hill. The SPD made a decision, you know what I'm saying, to stay away. They've created this environment. Now, clearly what happened inside the environment is something different, but like people forget to hold Chief Best accountable. People forget to hold the SPD accountable. They've written that out of history. And for a while, they've been able to say like, oh, the protesters were trying to attack and take over. We saw on January 6th what that looks like. Is that what it really looked like on Capitol Hill? So, anyways, as you can tell, I got a lot of.
You got a lot to get off your chest.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a lot to get off my chest. What was your question again?
I want to know what you saw in that tape, like when you looked and you saw what you had filmed.
What I saw, and you know, the protest, like any protest, you get this mix of people, man, a whole range, but. One group of people that really are the sustainers of a protest or the ideologues, the true believers, the people who you talk to and they're like, yeah, man, you know what? We can change the system. And, you know, that's what I saw. I saw a young boy at 16 years old who was already sitting there talking about ideas of systemic change. And so that's what I saw. And believe me, I saw all types up there at the CHOP and the Seattle protests. I was around for 3 murders, including Antonio's. And I also saw the very best of humanity during the Seattle protests. So I saw a wide range. He fits in the category of the people who are just true believers on what they wanted to see and work within the system of it. You heard him say they need better training. He didn't say burn down the system. He said, how can we have better training?
He said he believes in the mission of serve and protect, but he said they're not fulfilling that mission. And that was, the kind of ideological underpinning that I think maybe a lot of people didn't know if they would hear from a 16-year-old who showed up from California to participate in this thing. But now we have the footage. And what does that mean?
First and foremost, that it means that, man, the city of Seattle need to stop lying about this young boy, and putting out these narratives and everything else. It means that these people who've come up with all these things on the internet about this young boy, disparaging his character and everything else, man, I need to give a second thought to that. Most importantly, this is the person, think about this. When somebody wanted to have a sensible discussion about policing in this city, right? Man, this is the kind of person, although at 16 years old, this is the kind of person you said that you might want in the room. He's like, okay, clearly, there's a need for police. Okay, cool. How can we use systems that are already in place to make them better, and what other ideas or systems might be able to evolve? These are the kind of people that you actually probably want to sit down with.
Will, I want to ask you, Omari touched on this about the narrative from the city, but I think that in order to have the listener understand why this video is so important and why it does counter part of the narrative from the city, maybe if you could just introduce the broad strokes of this civil trial. It's about to start today, and it involves Antonio's father, who has filed a lawsuit against the city. Give us the general overview of what this civil trial is all about.
Yeah, even as we're sitting here talking right now, downtown, there's probably a trial starting, jury selection starting in this lawsuit. This is a lawsuit by Antonio Mays Sr., Antonio's dad, who lives in California and has sued the city over his son's death. At first, Antonio Sr. was arguing that Seattle created CHOP, created the conditions that led to CHOP and allowed it to continue, and that means that the city is in some way liable for Antonio's death. And he argued that the city basically botched its response to it. Once Antonio was shot, there was chaos. It took too long to get him help, and he might have survived if the city had a better emergency response.
There was a narrative that the people tried to get help from a nearby ambulance and the ambulance drove away, for example. Yeah.
There's evidence that protesters were trying to drive Antonio to a rendezvous point or trying to get him to an ambulance, and an ambulance started driving away from the protest. So that's part of this argument. Over the course of arguments, a lot of the case has kind of been thrown out, and so we're limited now to the city's emergency response. The lawsuit, as it stands right now, is going to be this trial is going to be about whether the city's emergency response kind of failed Antonio that night. What's relevant to this video is that part of the city's defense is that Antonio was committing a felony when he was shot. And there's a rule that if someone is hurt, injured in the course of committing a felony, you're not liable for it. It kind of, negates the lawsuit. So they're trying to argue that Antonio was up to no good that night. They're pointing out he was driving a stolen car. They're trying to make the case that he stole that car. And they're saying he was shooting from the car. We've reviewed the evidence. There is no evidence that we've found that any gunshots were coming from that Jeep.
And that includes from a city paid for review, right?
The city's own video analysis that they filed as part of this court case in their defense shows all of the gunshots that night that they captured, that they put together and compiled, only show gunshots directed at Antonio. and the other kid in the car. Nothing coming from the car. So that's important to note. So for years, there's been this narrative that the city is part of, that the city is supporting, that Antonio was a criminal. And his father has been arguing, no, my kid was there to protest. My kid was a good kid. And so that this video is another data point in that discussion.
What are the stakes of this civil trial, Omari, when it comes to the story of Antonio? What do you think the stakes are here?
I look at it a little bit differently. The outcome, government's going to do what it's going to do. It's real interesting, though. We've seen a lot of other folks walk away with these lawsuits and all this money for being tear gassed. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, man, let me tell you, it's wild. One, could I just tell you this? One, in 5 years since the protest, the police ain't never talked to me about Antonio Mays Jr. You know what I'm saying? That tape had been there for 5 years. The SPD has never talked to me about that night.
Even though you had all this evidence.
What I saw that night and everything else. So now you tell me, 5 years, they ain't never, to this day, SPD has never talked to me about this case or what I saw, or maybe peripheral vision, or what did you see here? And, it was a team of us, people down the street, around the corner, and everything else. The civil outcome is going to be the civil outcome. And I only say that to be that, like, man, whether Antonio Mays Sr. wins or whether he loses in the court of law, there's a difference between justice and what's just. And, what's just is restoring his son's name. And whether the good people of Seattle, this jury that's put together, sees it in that light or doesn't see it in that light. So for me, I don't know, when you talk about outcomes, case, and everything else, but I do know, and I do know in this city. Can I share something here with you real quick?
Please, yeah.
Why this is important to me, and we've seen this before, right? And how our city, at times, we talk about our city has a humanity switch. In February of 2021, there was a murder up in Nam in the Central District. And what happened is this guy, Greg Taylor, went and shot up a car in Nam and ended up killing Anais Valencia and injuring the driver.
The African American Museum.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And as Greg Taylor, the shooter, is walking out, SPD kills him, right? Now, SPD's initial release to people in the city said the shooter and the victim knew each other. And because they said that, and this was a shooting, a murder up in the Central District, guess what? Our city didn't care. No one cared. Oh, that's just them people killing each other in the Central District. And you know what? I fought tooth and nail. I knew the actual truth, that this was a random act of violence, that they didn't know each other. And man, I hit the SPD and I told SPD, you have to update this. You guys, this is false. It's fine if that's what you thought at the moment, but this was a random act of violence that killed Anais Valencia. And SPD refused. They were like, nah, we're not updating nothing. And, we had to put all out pressure because it wasn't fair to the family, one, to the victims or to the family to have this narrative. So finally, SPD updates it, and every single media outlet in this city, including this one here, all changed their line. There was like, no, this was a random act of violence. And guess what? In that moment, people went from seeing like, oh, I don't know, these people in the CD must be killing each other, to now they could understand that Anais Valencia could have been their daughter. It could have been their sister. It could have been their niece. And then Seattle turned on its humanity. And then we wanted to learn more about Anais and everything else. Take a second here and think about what Antonio Mays Jr. To this point, the narrative that's been out there is all these other things, which means that it's never allowed the good people of Seattle, to think that could be my son. Antonio could have been my nephew. Antonio could have been my cousin. We have an incoming mayor here who the same day that she basically, they said that she won out to the protest lines. This is a city. Let's think about that. Huh? How many people listening right now have a young cousin or brother or sister or anything that believe in something and they're like, I'm going to go and protest. I'm going to go get my name heard. But when we paint Antonio Mays Jr. in a different light, we don't allow the good people of the Emerald City to have any empathy, any sympathy, or humanity. It's just another number. And that's why this is important. That's why even in death, 5 years later, Antonio speaking from the grave, talking about put some respect on my name.
And just to double check, do you have any personal connection with the family? Do you have any connection with Antonio Mays Jr.'s dad?
Man, I've never met anybody in the Mays family. I've never met Antonio Mays Sr. I've never talked to Antonio Mays Sr. I've never talked to their law firm. And like I said, the SPD has never even talked to me. And so, my position over here was just like, man, what's right and what's wrong?
Well, you were part of the Zoom call that presented this tape that Omari had recorded but had been rediscovered after 5 years to Antonio Mays Sr. I can only imagine how incredibly emotional that was to have a father see the image and the video of his son talking after all these years. What was that like? Can you paint that scene for us?
Yeah, before this story came out, before we released Omari's footage to the world, we wanted to make sure that Antonio's dad saw it first. So myself and my wife, Sydney Brownstone, who's investigative reporter for the Seattle Times and is also working on this project, we got on a Zoom call with Antonio Sr., and we had scheduled this through his lawyer. So I don't know what he knew going into it, but we got in the Zoom call, and we say, we're going to show you something kind of heavy, and so we want to prepare you. But I didn't tell him anything about what was on this tape. So we start playing the scene. We see a protest leader talking. We see this young kid with a hoodie and a mask tap the protest leader on the shoulder to speak. And as soon as this kid comes on screen, Antonio Mays Sr. goes, "Is that my boy?" And he starts to cry. He recognized him in a second, and he had to get off the call. And a few hours later, he called us back. I think that's as far as he watched. I don't think he could watch any farther. But he said he recognized Antonio immediately because of his hands. And when you're a dad, you recognize your kid's hands. You recognize the shape of, even though you could only see his eyes and you recognize the details of this child. And he said he was proud. He said Antonio wrote his dad a letter 5 years ago that he was leaving California to make his dad proud, to join the civil rights movement of his generation, and to make a better world for his little sister and for his family. And Antonio Mays Sr. said, "My son, in this zone of anarchy and chaos, he resurfaces with the intellectuals of this movement, with the peaceful protesters, because that's who he was." And so,
I mean, he's negotiating over like sanitation. You know,
Right.
this is not sexy stuff, but he's part of that conversation.
he's part of a crowd that is negotiating with the city employee over logistics at CHOP. And his dad said, look at where my son resurfaces after all these years. It's with this group.
I'm talking with the founder of Converge Media, Omari Salisbury, and KUOW's Will James about newly discovered footage of an Antonio Mays Jr. at Seattle's CHOP. That's the teenager who was killed at CHOP, and it precipitated the end of the encampment. We're going to continue the conversation after a quick break here on KUOW. You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Let's get back to my conversation with Converge Media's Omari Salisbury and KUOW's Will James. We're talking about newly found footage of Antonio Mays Jr., the 16-year-old who was killed in 2020 at the CHOP on Seattle's Capitol Hill. The footage shows Mays speaking about police reform, and it goes counter to a narrative that's been widely held that Mays had somehow come to the CHOP to take advantage of a chaotic situation. Here's the rest of that conversation with Omari and Will. Omari, you wrote on your Converge website that you had a lot of, you wrestled with a lot when you were viewing this footage, and that you kind of shared some of your thoughts in this blog post. And I found the blog post incredibly powerful and just really important for people to read. So I want folks to check it out, whereweconverge.com. This part really stopped me in my tracks. For half a decade, I have wrestled with a heavy, haunting question in the quiet hours of the night. Was it my lens that brought him here? Did Antonio Mays Jr., a 16-year-old boy from California, watch my live streams and see a call to action? Did my coverage paint a picture that compelled him to leave his home, his family, and his safety to come to Seattle? You've had these questions in your heart that you wrote about here in this blog post, and you've wrestled with them, and I can only imagine what that's meant to you. Now, once you see this footage of Antonio, you've been able to hear from him directly his words. Does that change the way you feel about those questions?
For me, and Will and Sydney will tell you that they got all these late night emails from me because my son was just a few years older than Antonio. He was out there initially. He wanted to be next to his dad. And actually, KUOW did the first segment they did on a special about that. At some point, though, I'm like, oh, this is dangerous, son. You can't be out here. You know what I'm saying? If you're gonna be out here in the CHOP, you can only come out here during the day. And we had a studio right there, so he'd come, he'd work on the morning update show, he'd be around for a little bit. But I sent my son home, and there's so many other young people throughout the protest. Where I go, how old are you? Where are you from? It's dangerous out here. You shouldn't be out here. And I tried to help and guide as many young people as possible while I was out there, and it's on tape. I tell them it's just a dangerous space, and not just violent. It's dangerous because things like that, you get some of everybody. There's danger of violence, danger of predators, scam. I mean, it's just danger. That night, I even sent Will a video of me and my son. It was May 30th in downtown, and downtown was crazy, and there's gas everywhere, and somebody had poured the milk stuff on our eyes because the tear gas. And my son's like, "You're too old to be out here. You're moving too slow," and all of that. And seeing that took me back to the protest with my son, and it took me back to to how responsible I felt that I wouldn't have my kids out there, that I send my kids home. And I swear to God, man, we tried our best to keep as many young people out there safe. I can tell you this, that after watching the tape and everything else, I wish that I would have got a chance to meet Antonio, because I would have done my very best to keep him safe out there in that dangerous space. People, these young people with big ideas and stars in their eyes and grand visions, but sometimes they don't see danger right in front of them, and there probably wasn't enough people, especially at that point in the protest, there wasn't enough people to be like, hey, this isn't a safe space for you. How can I help you get home? There's a lot of people we send home. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people we figure out that this isn't a good place for you. No, you probably shouldn't be staying up here at 14 or 15 or 16 years old in one of these encampments. How can we get you home?
I'm so sorry. I know it's so hard to be processing this in real time.
People ask us sometimes, why are you revisiting this 5 years later? Like, why are you doing these stories? And it's like 2020 is still an open wound in this city. And you could hear it in Omari's voice. Like, these events are still wounding us 5 years later. And there's something unresolved about all this. And I feel like Antonio's death symbolizes that wound in a way. Like, we didn't deal with this. We didn't deal with this as a city. We didn't deal with this as a community.
Tell the truth. That's 100. The thing is, I consider myself fortunate, right? Because everything we went through with the protest, but at least I was able to stay busy. At least one way or another, and the body ultimately kept the score with me, but I was able to stay busy. And, now I'm following this in City Hall and, okay, well, man, let's try this with film and TV and everything else. There's a lot of people who left the protest and they went home alone with their trauma, with their pain, and with their anger, and no means to heal, and never been able to heal. And the way that the city moved, like from jump, the way the city moved around this didn't create a space and an opportunity for real openness and healing. The city did a few different things. I know the Inspector General at the time, it was Lisa Judge, had done a few things, but it is an open wound. And even though I sit here in your studio right now and I shed tears, but man, I look at it like it's a good thing, because you know what? My heart and my humanity is still intact. And despite the way that people want to rewrite history in this city and they want to revise history and everything else, you know what? Sometimes it's good to be able to look back and still be able to connect with that emotion, because that means that I haven't forgotten. And I hope that the people of this city, you don't forget. Don't forget what happened. Don't let people come in here and with clickbait tactics and polarizing, diatribes and everything else, come into this city with an agenda of just polarization that's all driven around views and clicks. People who know the truth is the responsibility. It's the responsibility here at Converge, and I'll be honest with you, we've been exhausted. We're still the little engine that could. And a lot of days we feel like we can't, but we figure it out. But if we can push back, then you guys need to push back. The people who know the truth in this city, it's a moral obligation to not let history be rewritten right in front of us.
Will, what's next for this case, the civil trial specifically, for people to understand about what's happening this week?
So this week is the beginning of a civil trial in the lawsuit by Antonio's dad, Antonio Mays Sr., who's seeking unspecified damages from the city over Antonio's death. This trial could last several weeks, and in the end, a jury will decide whether the city is partially responsible or not. But this may be the last public airing of this unsolved homicide from 2020. The police have been investigating it for 5 years. It's still an open investigation. We don't know if anyone will ever be arrested. So just apart from the technical aspects of this trial, this is kind of maybe the final reckoning over Antonio's death in public.
There was also a 14-year-old boy in the car with Antonio. He suffered a serious brain injury. What is the status of that 14-year-old now?
Yeah, Robert West is the 14-year-old who was injured in the car. He was shot in the head and he survived. He's living with serious brain trauma and seizure disorder. And I've never spoken to him, but he is living his life with those permanent wounds.
Omari, you talked about healing, and you talked about the fact that CHOP remains a kind of open wound for the people who were there. But in many ways, the city has moved on. Do you think that this civil trial and the conversation it is bringing will move us a step towards healing as a city, and especially for the people like you who were there?
Right. Well, I would say this, just even on a clarification, that, I mean, the Seattle protest had a few components. And the Seattle protest was the Western Barricade from June 1st to June 8th, when the Seattle Police Department abandoned their precinct. And you saw there for 7 days, you saw something Seattle had never seen before, a sustained neighborhood protest that lasted over a week. And you saw that day after day that these were your neighbors. This was your barista, your first responder, your bank teller. All those guys showed up right there to the Western Barricade every single day. And they showed up there because they believed in the value of black lives. They believed in that mission, right? After the police abandon their precinct is then when you go into CHOP. And I just think that it's important that when we don't mention the Western Barricade, we do a disservice to thousands of people, regular everyday Seattleites, who thought the sight of seeing their neighbors and neighborhoods tear gassed was not okay. And they came out in droves, and also other protests across the city, the Silent March and everything else, right? And so keeping in that context that CHOP was a part of the Seattle protest, not the Seattle protest in totality. I think for me, the thing is people can continue to keep learning. You know, it's weird. Like we don't have to throw away or discard or something, an event that happened there. People are still writing books about the Seahawks championship. I mean, like real deal. I mean, like think about that. There's things and there's events that happen, and we don't have. This is our history, good, bad, or different. This is Seattle's history. And I saw a thing to be one of the most educated cities in America with the most degrees and all this kind of stuff and everything else. It's okay for people to learn and to ask. And it's also okay for people to change maybe how they might have thought about things. And it's okay to now, if you felt some kind of way about Antonio Mays Jr. because you weren't able to hear him speak for himself, it's okay for you now to have a bit of humanity and a bit of empathy, and maybe perhaps see Antonio Mays Jr. as that could have been my son, that could have been my brother, or that could have been my cousin. And I think if people have a willingness to just learn, and you have a willingness to understand, and maybe even a willingness to shift positions, and that would be a good step here in healing. We have no expectation that government's ever going to do what we'd like them to do. It's the government. It's really up to us as the people to figure out the best way forward.
Omari Salisbury of Converge Media, who filmed this incredible footage that was just rediscovered by an NPR producer. Thank you very much for being here and talking to me about Antonio Mays Jr. and just on the verge of this civil trial, especially. It's so important to hear directly from you. You were there, and you have obviously gone through it and are still going through it in terms of processing what it means for you and for the city. And I really appreciate your perspective and your expertise here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving an opportunity to remind our friends and family out here across the Emerald City that, man, it's all right to turn on that humanity switch.
Will James of KUOW, who is working on a reporting and podcast project about CHOP. Omari's participating in that, also in partnership with the Seattle Times. Thank you, Will.
Thanks, Libby. Thanks for letting us talk about this.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or of course on your favorite podcast app.